The most annoying one is I'm pretty sure you've had people telling you this all the time. It's how many organizations have 500 plus different statuses. It's just,
Oh,
you have like how many different words can you have that describe, this work item is on the testing phase. You'll find
yeah.
it written in like 20, 30 different ways. I've seen some use cases, but trying to replicate a full CRM, I know it's possible. We can do it with Jira. I mean, CRM, I know it's more than that, but to oversimplify it, it's a Kanban board, more or less. But yeah, of course, the CRM has a lot of features like, cadences to contact customers and so on. That will be very difficult to replicate in
Mhm.
Atlassian.
And there's like this huge Jira hate, I don't know what it called, like Jira hate in the development space, but kind of everywhere. And
Mm.
they're like, oh yeah, Jira's a terrible tool. It's so good for micromanagers and like tracking down what you do, and it's too complicated and all this and that. But every single excuse that I've heard or like reason I've heard for it is all due to the way it was configured and set up initially. Like that's just how it was structured. Cool. I'll start out with like a question that might be a little bit hard to answer, but I'd love to know, what do you think teams get wrong, teams or companies get wrong in Atlassian when they are using it on a day to day?
Ooh, okay, yes. I think it's trying to find the right balance between too much customization and running it out of the box. So in a sense, you want to empower the teams to use their configurations, their workflows, and things like that. But in a sense, it starts getting complicated when you have um, too many things. When you're a developer and for every task that you're creating in Jira, you have to maybe put business value or other custom fields that your manager marks as mandatory. It will start becoming, that's why some developers eventually would say, oh, I prefer Trello instead of Jira and things like that.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing. How do you know if you're over the line of like too customized, or maybe you're right on the line or you're far from it?
All you notice when there are struggles within the organization. For example, when leadership is trying to get the overview, but it becomes too difficult because every team is doing their own thing. It gets a little bit tricky when teams are trying to collaborate and it's like, oh, why is it so difficult to move a work item from this project to that project? Well, that's because they're using a completely different configuration, and yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed the same thing. Like you said, some teams want to use Trello, some teams might not like Jira, and then there's like this huge Jira hate, I don't know what it called, like Jira hate in the development space, but kind of everywhere. And
Mm.
they're like, oh yeah, Jira's a terrible tool. It's so good for micromanagers and like tracking down what you do, and it's too complicated and all this and that. But every single excuse that I've heard or like reason I've heard for it is all due to the way it was configured and set up initially. Like that's just how it was structured. So let's say that there's a team that currently has that overly complex structured system. How do you go about like scaling back and fixing that process?
Yeah, well, sometimes, I mean, the problem with, or not necessarily the problem, but the way that Atlassian tools are adopted, as you probably know, are bottom up. So you have one team that started using Jira, and then another team possibly at some point in time also started using Jira, but not the same instance, a different one, because they felt like they needed to create their own one without knowing about each other. And then suddenly you have 3, 4, 8, 16 teams using Jira. Some of them are in the same instance, some of them are in other instances. And then you ask someone to merge, and they just merge, they just do what they're told, and without thinking about, okay, what are things here that we could reuse? I'll be drastic at some point. Would make sense to, just start fresh. But of course, history data and so on. So it takes time. It takes time to basically audit the usage of Jira in our organization and suggest something that would work for everyone. Takes time.
Mhm.
I work as a consultant, so a lot of customers reach out and it's like, okay, I have budget for 2 months for you guys to come here and fix everything. Yeah, no, 2 months doesn't give you enough time to work with the teams to understand how they work and so on. I've always been defending that for majority of companies there should be someone dedicated working on this. But yeah, you know, Atlassian has always been selling it as like the tool, everything works out of the box. So it's very difficult to convince customers that they should have someone dedicated
Yeah,
on basically maintaining the system.
that's very true. You said that a lot of teams have a bottom up approach. I noticed the same thing. So, do you recommend a kind of a top down approach where you get all your teams in place and you're like, here's the new platform, let's build this out for everybody?
I think so. I think like here's the new platform and here's how we're going to use it. For example, one of the reasons why we have not adopted goals yet, but we're looking forward to for some of my customers is because goals doesn't necessarily have the granularity of permissions that we need. So if we suddenly launch goals and every team starts creating their own goals, it's gonna be difficult to for top leadership to keep an overview of what's going on. So we're waiting for goals to have. I hear that goal types, for example, is coming soon. I hope that some sort of permissions will come up soon as well. So yeah, it's having a little bit of discipline and having a plan on how to adopt the tool before we adopt it. It's quite important.
Yeah, my biggest problem with goals is actually that there is no way to delete them. You could only archive them. That's the only option you have. And when
Yeah,
you go to like I left one goal for us just to have something to sort of filter on. And when you go to select a goal in like a Jira work item, you have all the archive stuff showing up, and it's such a pain to like see all that in there, not be able to delete it and like do anything with it, and it's showing up in my list of goals that are archived and not needed. And yeah, permissions is a
that's
big one, but for me, I would say archives is another problem.
absolutely, absolutely. But I always tell people that come to me and complain, "Oh, Atlassian, this product is not yet mature, blah 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 blah." That's just how Atlassian works historically. They launch something, they get feedback from the users and the customers and so on, and they improve the product. For very big enterprise that need the products to be mature, either they are willing to cut Atlassian some slack, or they have to wait 1 year or sometimes 2 years to adopt a product. I think that honestly for me knowing that and having the expectations straight, it's it's absolutely no problem. I know it is a matter of time until goals become mature for the organizations that I work with. The same goes to focus, talent. It's just the beginning. I mean, focus is very recent, talent's very recent as well. So yeah.
What is the? I've played around with focus. It's very similar to goals. What's the purpose of using another tool to kind of track your work in the same way?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how focus could help out, but I have, for example, customers that are using ServiceNow for some sort of enterprise agile planning. Not really enterprise agile planning, but for example, storing the programs, storing the focus areas in ServiceNow, and then developing integrations between ServiceNow and Jira to connect those things. I think Focus would make an argument for moving for these type of customers to move data over to that Atlassian platform.
Interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of those tools, like all those tools that are more niche, Jira Align, Focus Talent, I don't tend to see a lot of companies and teams using them. I know that they're like sort of in their own enterprise sort of bubble. There's not many SMB companies that are using them just because of the pricing and sort of use case as well. Do you find that like every enterprise team or most enterprise teams that use Jira Align and those types of tools as well?
Not necessarily. I mean, in the market that I'm on, which is Norway, for example, I am yet to see a customer using Jira Align. I know they exist, but I have not seen one yet.
Yeah, I've seen maybe one. use Jira Align, but yeah, it's not very common, and I don't know if that's maybe it's just because there's like a very specific type of team that can use Jira Align and knows about it and uses it versus the
Mhm.
teams that like don't need that kind of a use case. They just have no use case for it. They'll never even consider it. But yeah, I'm curious if like maybe a more medium sized business of a few hundred people, maybe breaching into like 5 or 600, has a good use case for Jira Align because 95% of the ones that I've worked with just most of the time don't even know what it is.
I have organizations which could potentially use Jira Align, but at this point they have been using other tools for a long time, and it's hard to get them to make the move.
Makes sense. I know you were like a system tools lead before.
Mhm.
Can you explain what that role was? I'm just a little bit curious about that.
Yeah, so the way that I got onboarded into basically Atlassian, most people start using Jira as a user, just log into Jira and so on. I started using Jira as a user of the REST API because I was tasked with creating systems that would automatically create tasks in Jira, automatically resolve them. So kind of like my system would receive events and based on some thresholds would decide whether to create a task in Jira or not. If the event will auto resolve by itself to automatically resolve the task, assign it to the correct people. I was also using APIs to collect reports because at that point dashboards were kind of limited, and they still are, to be fair. Extracting data from Jira and putting into a data visualization tool such as Power BI or a different dashboard software. So that's eventually how I became passionate about Atlassian. And then, yeah, around 6 years later, became an Atlassian consultant. And I've been for almost 7 years now.
hmm You mentioned dashboarding and reporting. What is your go-to solution for that in Jira? Do you just directly go to Power BI and integrate with Power BI, or is there something more native that you like to use? What's your go-to there?
My favorite tool is actually Atlassian Analytics. It's pretty good, but
Really?
unfortunately, my customers are not willing to spend money on enterprise licenses. So Power BI it is. So yeah, so we typically just, use the Jira REST API and connect with Power BI and then write some scripts in M language in Power BI to kind of like treat the data. And yeah, build all the visualization there. I would argue that it's too much effort to basically build the integration every time you want to make a Power BI dashboard. But it works, but it's still better than having people, which I've seen, having people going to Jira, export everything as CSV, put in an Excel file, and start making diagrams out of it. Power BI is a little bit better than that.
Yeah, definitely. So analytics is your preferred method of reporting. Do you find any limitations with that? I've seen a few teams have problems with like the data they could actually pull out of analytics. Have you ever come across that?
No, to be fair, not advanced user of analytics because then again, majority of my customers are not willing to foot up the bill for enterprise. But it's from what I've played with, it looks pretty good because a lot of cases, I mean, some of my customers they just want to extract the Jira work items, put them in a table and build diagrams based on that. And for that, I mean, with a data lake, it's much easier than REST API pagination and all that thing together with Power BI becomes a little bit cumbersome just for the initial setup.
Right. What about plugins? Do you ever suggest reporting plugins or use those, or are you going straight to Power BI every time?
I've had customers that are pretty happy with EazyBI. But yeah, it's the problem with marketplace apps. And I mean, I hear rumors that Forge now or will soon allow different user tiers, like you can select a subset of users for an app. At least I saw that on the Forge documentation. So that is something that I expect to be coming soon, but it's up for the marketplace vendors to adopt it or not.
Right.
So the problem with EasyBI is that you'll have to buy so many licenses for an organization, for example, with 5,000, 10,000
Mhm.
Jira users. You have to buy so many licenses for 20, 30 people that will eventually be the users of the reports and the dashboards. So that has been a little bit of the challenges on trying to convince customers to adopt marketplace apps. So I'm kind of curious what's going to happen in the next year or two, in terms of of course. Then again, you can always make the case that you can go for enterprise, spin off different Jira instances to save on marketplace apps. But if we're talking about EazyBI, you want to be on the instance where the data is. So yeah,
Mhm. I've talked to a few partners about that the tiered approach with specific users. It seems like so it is an opt-in, and the current pricing is very affordable, typically per user. So sounds like what most of the partners will do if they do opt into this user tiered selection is they're going to raise their prices. So
absolutely,
most
absolutely.
likely, yeah, most likely you'll end up paying the same amount regardless, is what it seems like, maybe a little bit less.
Mhm.
But an app that might cost $1 per user and you're paying for 30 users might cost $5 per user if you can opt out and only give it to specific individuals.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm actually really curious to um, see who opts into something like that and what the pricing will look like. But also, I'm really curious about the tiers because they've introduced different tiers for plugins as well. So you could have more basic feature sets, more complex, maybe like a free tier, which I think is a really interesting potential.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm super curious about how the partners will adopt those new tools.
Absolutely. And I mean, I can absolutely expect the cost per user is going to be higher if we go for something like that. But
Mhm.
it allows us, for example, to, let's say, a small team of 10 people on an organization of 10,000 users. A small team is considering X-Ray for test management. And okay, let's buy licenses for 10 users. Okay, of course, it's going to be a cost per user that is going to be quite high, but it's still going to be, I imagine that it will be much cheaper to buy 10 users than to buy 10,000.
Right.
So, I mean, regardless how much they're going to jack up the price. So they'll basically make it easier for customers to adopt X-Ray, for example. And then from these 10 people, maybe it'll grow to 50, maybe it'll go to 100. And at some point, okay, might as well buy the license for everyone when the costs starting to be comparable to buying the license for everyone.
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation to have because some use cases are very specific to a very specific team. But you mentioned like EasyBI. You can argue that a dashboard or reporting or consolidating data is sort of impacting everybody in the Jira environment. So it kind of makes sense to pay per user for every user. I can think of a few other plugins like, Tempo, for example. Almost everybody's going to be using that. So in a lot of scenarios, I think it kind of does benefit everybody inside of that Jira environment to where you can sort of argue and say, since everybody's benefited, you should pay per user. Script Runner is another great example. Like, not probably hardly anybody's going into Script Runner to actually write the scripts, but everybody's benefiting from a Script Runner script running on their work items. So that's another interesting perspective that I've heard before.
Absolutely, the script runner example is very interesting. I don't know how Adaptavist would ever implement this new tiered approach with users, but there are apps that could. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing a lot of them will stay as is because it doesn't make sense for Script Runner to change EasyBI, probably any reporting plugin, because it makes sense for them to pull context and data from all user interactions and all the things that users do. For example, if you're reporting on time tracking, all users add their time tracking in. Maybe there's only 3 people viewing that report, but still kind of makes sense to bill everybody because you're pulling data from all users. But yeah, I'm assuming a lot of those plugins will just not change, and then we'll have a few that adopt that new pricing model and go
Mhm.
towards having a specific number of users, which is actually great. I actually don't mind that because a lot of teams do struggle with a high cost for like few people using that particular tool, and it would make it way more accessible.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I'm actually really interested to see if there's a lot of. I've seen a few plugins start to tier their feature sets. I'm really curious if plugins will start to have a lot of free, sort of like what you see in the typical SaaS world. Like there's a free option, there's
Mhm.
the mid tier, and then there's like a premium or whatnot. I'm really curious if we'll see a lot of teams adopting that free version for like smaller teams, which is kind of the case now with like under 10 users. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. I'm curious how these changes will actually impact the users and teams that are using these apps.
Regarding these app editions, as it's called, I've seen an interesting case. I have a customer that has been using one app, has been working fantastically, but now they are forced to upgrade to a new because they have been enjoying unlimited, let's call it executions, and now they started creating a difference between like, okay, up to 50,000 executions you are in standard. If you use more, now you have to pay for premium edition. So I had a customer that yeah, it's a small bump, but
Okay.
it's yeah, they got affected by it.
And they're doing it. They're purchasing the higher tier.
Not necessarily. They are considering stepping out, but not because of that. It was not the pricing that influenced it.
Okay.
It doesn't help, but it was not the pricing that, yeah.
Well, right. If it was free, they would do it, right? So it is pricing.
Yeah, true, true, true. But yeah,
So,
it's about the integration with the GitLab and GitHub. But they're currently
mm,
migrating from GitLab on-prem
oh,
to GitHub Cloud. And once they migrate to GitHub Cloud, they can just use the native Atlassian
mm,
integration. So they are considering. We'll just have to evaluate how it's going to be in terms of security and so on, because they're quite strict about like who can access certain GitHub organizations and so on. So we're not sure if that's going to work with a native Jira Cloud integration, or whether we're going to continue using this app or not. So yeah.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you're like me, you've probably deleted a Jira work item by accident, and then you realize that there's no way to get it back. Happens to the best of us, and that's why I want to share one quick tip. Always have a backup. Trust me, I've seen too many teams learn this the hard way. Our partner, GitProtect.io, makes this simple. It's a reliable backup solution for Jira that protects your work so mistakes don't turn into disasters. Check them out at GitProtect.io. I think a lot of teams will start to reevaluate, and I think a lot of Atlassian stuff is moving to like different pricing models. Assets is now capped at 50,000. If you go over that, it's a kind of a pay per use model, consumption model. But more products, more tiers, more price increases as we keep going, and like there's more features, which is great, but it's also getting considerably more expensive to actually use Jira.
It's funny that you mentioned assets because I have a customer that is currently in data center. They have a little bit over 500,000 assets, so a little bit over 500,000. It will cost them to migrate to cloud, and that's actually a reason why they have put a little bit on hold the migration to cloud because they have to justify all these massive increasing costs because of assets. But with Atlassian moving towards collections and granting some freebies when you adopt a collection. We have now the teamwork collection, the strategy collection. There's no collection for service management yet. And I suspect it's going to be announced soon. So what I hope, and I understand this is a lot of wishful thinking, but what I hope is with the service management collection, the customers that adopt it will get a little bit more assets. That will be pretty
That
nice.
would be great.
Atlassian gets
Yeah.
gets what they want. They will get more customers to adopt collections, and the customers will get, you know, a little bit more assets for free. That's what I hope, but most likely they will get just more Rovo executions or something like that.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of collections. I did a whole pricing breakdown of the teamwork collection.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're purchasing Confluence, Jira, and oh man, there's a few others in there. I think it was primarily Confluence and Jira. If you're purchasing those two on the premium package and you go with a collection, you essentially get Loom and Atlassian Guard for free. So it's like two extra tools and the AI version of Loom, which is like $15 per user, which is considerably high. So it actually does save you quite a bit if you're using Loom and potentially Guard. It also does expose you to like the opportunity to use them, which I think was the intent. A lot of teams
Mm-hmm.
don't use Loom or don't adopt it, so this is like their way of like pushing people to do so. My ultimate vision or like dream of collections is we have sort of what Zoho does, where you have your teamwork collection, you have your strategy collection, maybe your service management collection, but then you have like the end all be all, like every Atlassian tool, every Atlassian product, every limit for one price, like $100 a month per user, something like that. I think
Mm,
that's what Zoho does. They have like each tool is like $10 a month or so, and then you could get 4 or 5 tools for, probably close to $100, or you could get like 50 tools for $100, and
mm.
it's totally worth doing, especially if you're using a lot of those tools. And I think a lot of people would be more eager to adopt a service management product if they already have access to it. So yeah, I'd love to see that at some point. I think that'd be really interesting.
True, true. I agree. But also, I mean, yeah, there's one problem that we have with the teamwork collection, for example, which is the amount of users have to match. So, for example, if you are buying 8,000 licenses of Confluence and 5,000 licenses of Jira, yeah, it gets a little bit tricky. Another thing is, yeah, you mentioned it will be nice to like, mix and match when it comes to tools, and you will get a discount for buying in bulk. That'll be pretty cool. But I see, for example, I don't see organizations where there are out there, but at least none of my customers have the same amount of license for Jira Service Management, the same license for Jira, because these are two different use cases. You don't have as many IT as you have developers, for example. But there are situations where I have a customer where they like to grant access to Jira Service Management to everyone, so the developers can jump in and resolve a
Right.
few tickets in
Or
service
even
management.
assets. Like
Exactly,
you don't have
exactly.
access to assets without the JSM license, and you don't want to give a JSM license to someone who just needs to make a couple of changes. So like that kind of causes a problem as well.
Yeah, yeah. We've been using assets in Jira Software for a while, in our organization with around 5,000 users and only 50 licenses of Jira Service Management. I hope that Atlassian is not listening and they will not shut it down. But we've been taking advantage of that, storing, for example, some,
Mhm.
software components and things like that as assets and using it in Jira.
I wonder if they'll break it out at some point, because I have a lot of use cases of teams using assets that don't. There's always a tie-in to service management, but again, not a lot of users need that functionality to
Mhm.
go into JSM. They just need the assets functionality. So I'm curious if they'll like maybe break it out into its own product eventually to work with all Atlassian products, but maybe be a separate payment or like separate plan or something along those lines. Would be
Mhm.
interesting to see for sure.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on Jira and CRM build outs inside of Jira, or like plugins that do CRM stuff in Jira? Because I know you have a somewhat of a CRM background, and I'm curious if you've played around or seen teams use Jira as sort of a CRM.
No, I have not. I have seen some people trying to. For example, not necessarily to track their leads in terms of sales, but to track their customers as assets. For example, I've seen some use cases, but trying to replicate a full CRM, I know it's possible. We can do it with Jira. CRM, I know it's more than that, but to oversimplify it, it's a Kanban board, more or less. But yeah, of course, the CRM has a lot of features like, cadences to contact customers and so on. That will be very difficult to replicate in Atlassian. And it's interesting to see a direction that I've not seen Atlassian taking, trying to tackle CRM. Because, Jira Service Management came from the users that were trying to use Jira software as the service management tool. And then
Right.
Atlassian decided, you know what, we're going to make this.
Mhm.
So if there is enough people trying to use Jira as a CRM, maybe Atlassian will see the potential on it. But I see that the market's already a little bit saturated, and yet another CRM to
Yeah.
compete it will be difficult. But you see Salesforce now trying to tackle areas. Service management and so on. So who knows?
Yeah. Atlassian likes to step in these sort of places where they know they can have a pretty big impact, but also make a lot of money. Service management is like a huge opportunity. ServiceNow is
Hmm.
like the only good option for enterprise, and JSM now is like catching up to that, and I think has already caught up to that. And those two are like the only really good enterprise. I mean, there might be others like Oracle related stuff, but
Mhm.
in terms of like jumping in, getting a service management platform set up and running within a few minutes, nothing else could do that on an enterprise level except for Jira, which is kind of crazy to think about. Um, but yeah, it'd be interesting for Atlassian to step into the CRM space because that's a very, very like sticky tool, but it
Mhm.
also benefits a lot from integrating with other tools in your organization. So, for example, like we run all of our client projects inside of Jira. If we have our CRM tied in right now, it's like a integration. But if we have our CRM tied in, we just run automations to create projects, to create tasks, and everything else. Makes the process way easier. And CRMs are so sticky and very hard to migrate away from. So, if there is that opportunity, maybe Atlassian will buy like a CRM startup or something. I think that'd be interesting to see how many people adopt it and use it and kind of like their implementation of it because it ties in so well to their other tools.
I mean, I haven't looked into it, but I'm pretty sure there are marketplace apps that try to do this, that try to
Yeah, there's
replicate
Atlas
this.
CRM. Mhm.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, now I remember. I actually looked into Atlas CRM. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, but you mentioned an interesting thing, which is the fact that Jira Service Management is. I mean, you can get up to speed so fast. So it depends basically on how much customization do you want to do from the out of the box, and that's pretty much
Right.
that's what's going to define how long the project is. So it's very hard to explain to enterprise customers. So you're telling me I don't need an army of consultants to set this up? So of course you can have an army of consultants. It will increase the quality of the project. It's a lot of things you can do within the Atlassian platform. And I mean, especially now when Forge is becoming, let's say, mainstream, and more people are getting used to just build some apps for Forge. uh, I mean, it can be as complicated as you want a service management to be, but
Mhm.
most of the mistakes that I've seen for a lot of my customers is they tend to overconfigure so much and customize so much that when changes come, they'll stay behind. For example, customers of Remedy, they were customizing so much that they couldn't upgrade Remedy anymore because every time that there was an upgrade, there was pain. So I'm also a little bit against over customizing, but it is fun for a consultant sometimes do a little bit of the difficult things, but yeah, it's for the health of or maintenance in the future. It's gonna make things a little bit more complicated.
Mhm. I think it's really, I actually think it's really problematic that a lot of these bigger legacy companies don't allow you or don't have the option to like jump in and have something up and running within a few minutes. Speaking for myself and like the people that are my age group, I almost never buy a product unless I could go in there myself. I could see how it works. I like it or I don't like it, and then I continue using it. I will like pretty much never consider a product unless I could do it myself first. And I
Mhm.
know it's like totally different with the older generation, and like they want to talk to someone, they want to have an expert, they want to have someone guide them through it, show them a demo. Nobody my age does that. It's like unheard of. You don't want to talk to anyone. You don't want to see anyone. You just want to get in there and you want to explore, see if it'll work, which is a good thing and a bad thing because you do get some form of like familiarity by doing it yourself. But you also don't quite experience the tool the way it was designed to be experienced. And it was a lot of times you jump in and you kind of get the wrong impression in a way, and you set things up wrong, and you're like, oh, this is terrible. I'm never going to use it again. And I think Jira kind of gets that rap because it's so easy to dive in and use it. But I think over the next like couple of decades, we'll see a lot of those tools. Either they'll have to have that ability to like jump in and use them, or they're probably just going to lose a lot of market share to tools like Jira that allow you to do so. Because yeah, not a lot of people my age are willing to stick out for a 1 hour demo from someone to show them how the tool works. Like if I want something now, I'm going to go find it, see if I could use it, or I'll move on. That's kind of the approach that I have as of right
That
now.
that's a very interesting take. I've never thought about it, but subconsciously I
Really.
do the same. Like yeah, I just like I don't normally if I'm comparing different products for my own personal usage. a product that I have to insert or pay a minimum a month to try it out, or I have to schedule a demo or something, I'm not even gonna touch it. I want a tool that I can just, start for free, test it out, works, I'll pay for it, and I'll gladly pay for it. But yeah, a tool that doesn't, wow, I've never thought about that, but it makes so much sense. But also, I mean, you have to keep in mind that a lot of the leadership of organizations and management are people that a lot of those decision makers are people that don't have time to go in and try the tools by themselves. They want someone to show it to them and convince them. And yeah, and that is something that a lot of other competitors of Atlassian, some of them have been doing pretty good at talking to leadership and convincing them in terms of sales. Atlassian, when it comes to sales, they're still pretty fresh. Only a few years ago they started really investing into sales. Before they were almost purely relying on partners. So it's interesting to see how it's going to develop.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, there's a this is like very very businessy, but there's a saying that you only sell because you can't market, and you only market because your product sucks. Because if you have a good product, it'll just spread like wildfire with word
yep,
of mouth, which I think is what Jira and Atlassian kind of did. They didn't do any sales or marketing. They just started the product, showed it to a few people, and just word of mouth kind of took off.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, if you have a really, really good product, it'll do that. Obviously, you typically need some sales or marketing process to get the most effective or get the most out of the tool and like get it into the most hands of people. But yeah, it's very interesting because the way I actually came across this was in my first or second job. I was working as like a junior system admin or IT tech, and I was working with like one other IT director, and we were looking for an like ITSM software. And his gut reaction was like, "Oh yeah, let's schedule some demos." And I'm like, "Oh, can't I just go online and like find something?" And that like I was like 18 years old or something. I was like, I just want to figure this out myself. Like, why would I schedule a demo? That's weird. I thought to
Mm-hmm.
myself, I was like, is this what IT people do? They just talk to vendors all day. But yeah, my gut reaction was like, that's very interesting that like he goes straight into, oh, let's talk to these companies, let's see what solutions they offer, let's chat with them, see if it works for us. Whereas my reaction was like, oh, let's just go online and find what we could find and go with the one that we think is best. But yeah, that was why I was like seeing this stark contrast, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um,
I've
but yeah, to
seen
this day,
yeah,
go
I've
ahead.
seen a few RFPs that the customer is asking for a demo, but they also say that we would like access to the demo for X weeks after. So yeah, there are some customers out there that they're during the sales process they would like to get their hands on and try it out. But I still see too many that they'll just like just like it to be explained to them, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think there's a place and time for demo, but I like to have that hands-on approach. And then if I like what I see, I'll be like, okay, let's do the demo
Mm,
next. That's kind of my next step.
mm,
But yeah, I always think back to that time where I was like that stark contrast of like, whoa, this is how someone else completely thinks through a process versus like how I would do it. And most companies and teams that I've worked with are kind of the same way. They'll try to do some general research on their own, see what they find, and go from there. That seems to be the most common approach that I've come across in my age group, anyway.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Paulo, for being here. Anything else that you would say teams get wrong in Atlassian and Jira? Things that you notice almost every single time you would work with an Atlassian customer?
Oh my God, so many things.
So many.
I know the most annoying one is I'm pretty sure you've had people telling you this all the time. It's how many organizations have 500 plus different statuses. It's just,
Oh,
you have like how many different words can you have that describe, this work item is on the testing phase. You'll find it written in like 20, 30 different ways. Like waiting for testing, QA, testing, tests, like all sorts of different ways of writing it. And yeah, I mean, if you're trying to get an overview in organization, for example, how long or how much you're spending on testing, or how long are the work items spending on the testing phase, it's impossible to get a completely over,
Okay.
yeah, global overview over your organization when everyone is doing things differently. I mean, I've seen people doing statuses with emojis and things like that because you know what, it's fun. But yeah, I mean, and I do like to do a few fun things in Jira myself as well. But it's, I mean, when you start seeing an organization that has over 500 statuses in Jira, and I've seen way more than that, you start questioning, okay, no one has really had time to think this through. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You just know every team's went in and like created their own workflows and their own thing, and like there's no
yeah,
one managing all of this. My favorite is seeing the same word but with different capitalizations. So you have
hmm,
like in progress with a
oh
capital
yeah,
P, in progress with the lowercase p. It's just like, what is going on here? It's the same exact thing.
absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, you have, yeah, it's the statuses and yeah, so it's sorry, I'm just getting a little bit of brain fart here. But yeah, it's the possibility like everyone creating new statuses without thinking, but that's also when you know, when Atlassian created a different project type, when it was called Next Gen and Classic, it was quite confusing at that time because you would see Next Gen like that's the type of project that I want to use. I love that Atlassian renamed that because now you have team managed, company managed. And
Mhm.
company managed is perfect because this is intended to be managed by your company, by your administrators. Do you want to customize it a little bit further? Negotiate that with a Jira administrator. So, and that works. I really like the naming of company managed and team managed. We're not a
Mhm.
big fan of team managed projects.
Me
It doesn't
neither.
work for big organizations that I work with, but I can totally see the case, or you know, some small teams in a small company they don't want to overcomplicate it. Like if you want to add a field, why does it have to be in a field configuration and the screen and all these things? It's you know what, team managers can work. Yeah, not for the type of customers that I work with. They need a little bit of discipline on how they use Jira, but otherwise, no.
Yeah, I totally agree. Team managed are pretty limited and oftentimes have to be migrated away from. But the terminology makes a ton of sense. And teams are still confused because they don't really know what that means. But when you explain it to
Mm,
them, they're like, oh, I get it
yeah,
now. Versus
mm,
like next gen is like, but it's the newer, shinier thing. I want that. And
yeah.
that was very confusing for sure.
Mm.
All right, Paulo. Well, thanks for being here. Appreciate your time, your insight on Atlassian, and yeah, we'll definitely have to have you back. Anywhere where people could find you, maybe LinkedIn or social media.
Yeah, LinkedIn, yes, always there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Paulo, for being here.
Thanks, Josh. Bye bye.